Welcome to Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. Wall Street's largest banks have moved to prop up the ailing San Francisco-based First Republic Bank after the sudden collapse of regional banks Signature and SVB last week sparked fears of a financial meltdown. Bank of America, Citigroup, JP Morgan Chase, Wells Fargo will each make $5 billion in uninsured deposits into First Republic, while 7 other Wall Street firms will deposit a further $10 billion. The Federal Reserve reports Wall Street firms have received about $300 billion in emergency lending over the past week, roughly half what the Fed loaned banks during the 2008 financial crisis. On Capitol Hill, Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen sought to reassure the Senate Finance Committee over the stability of U.S. financial markets.
I can reassure the members of the committee that our banking system is sound and that Americans can feel confident that their deposits will be there when they need them.
Yellen defended the Biden administration's decision to allow all depositors at SVB and Signature to recover their assets after the banks collapsed using money from the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation. That's despite the fact that over 93% of assets at SVB and Signature were not insured by the FDIC. Under questioning from Senators, Yellen admitted smaller banks that fail might not get the same treatment. The United Nations says there's encouraging momentum in the effort to end the war in Yemen after more than 8 years of conflict. U.S. and Saudi officials said Iran has agreed to stop arming Houthis in Yemen as part of the recent China-brokered deal to restore diplomatic ties between Saudi Arabia and Iran. Here in the United States, Senators Chris Murphy and Mike Lee introduced a bipartisan resolution this week that would require the U.S. to report on Saudi human rights abuses with the goal of ending U.S. arms sales to the kingdom. The humanitarian catastrophe in Yemen has left over 17 million people in need of assistance. The Polish president, Andrzej Duda, said Thursday his government will ship 4 Soviet-era MiG fighter jets to Ukraine, becoming the first nation since Russia's invasion to meet Ukraine's request to deliver warplanes. Following that announcement, Slovakia's government said it would transfer 13 MiG fighters to Ukraine. Finland, the Netherlands, and other NATO members are considering similar transfers. In Geneva, the UN-mandated Independent International Commission of Inquiry on Ukraine said Thursday Russia's committed wide-ranging war crimes in Ukraine, including possible crimes against humanity. Eric Moos, the chair of the commission.
The Commission has concluded that the Russian authorities have committed numerous violations of international humanitarian law and international human rights law, in addition to a wide range of war crimes, including the war crime of excessive incidental death, injury or damage, willful killings, torture, inhuman treatment, unlawful confinement, rape, as well as unlawful transfer and deportation.
China's foreign minister said Thursday he called his Russian counterpart to urge a diplomatic solution to the Ukraine war, warning the conflict could spiral out of control. The warning came as China announced President Xi Jinping will travel to Moscow early next week to hold talks with Russian President Vladimir Putin. Australia's agreed to purchase 220 Tomahawk cruise missiles from the United States at a cost of nearly $1 billion. The U.S. State Department approved the sale Thursday, just days after President Biden formally announced plans to sell nuclear-powered submarines to Australia in a bid to counter China's influence in the Indo-Pacific. The Biden administration is threatening to ban TikTok if its Chinese owners refuse to sell their stake in the U.S. version of the hugely popular video sharing app. TikTok has been the target of increasing scrutiny by some lawmakers who say it's a threat to national security and that its owner, Beijing-based ByteDance, could use Americans' personal data. On Thursday, the UK became the latest country to announce TikTok would be banned on government devices following similar bans by the US, Canada, and the European Union. In the occupied West Bank, Israeli forces killed 4 Palestinians, including a teenager, in a raid on the city of Jenin on Thursday. The deaths bring the number of Palestinians killed by Israeli forces this year alone to at least 83. The Palestinian Authority and Israel are scheduled to hold security talks in Egypt over the weekend, which will include officials from Egypt, Jordan, and the United States. Fresh protests erupted across France Thursday after President Emmanuel Macron bypassed Parliament and invoked executive powers to push through a highly contested law raising the retirement age from 62 to 64. Macron took the drastic step after it appeared he might not have the necessary support in the National Assembly. Lawmakers booed and sang the national anthem while holding up protest signs and signaled Macron could soon face a no-confidence vote by opposition parties. Massive protests and prolonged strikes have rocked France over the past 2 months as union leaders vowed to keep up the disruptions. This is a teacher speaking from Thursday's protests in Paris.
It's proof that the president's party is a minority in parliament, but he is also a minority in public opinion. The responsibility is on President Macron. After he refused to have dialogue with the unions, he decided to pass this law by force. This law, which is unfair and unpopular, will result in people working more to get less.
In the United Kingdom, unions representing medical workers, including nurses and paramedics, have agreed to a tentative deal on pay raises that would recover ground lost to inflation. Union leaders hailed the deal as a historic victory, capping months of rolling strikes by thousands of workers at the National Health Service. About 100,000 civil servants and others, including junior doctors at NHS, remain in a long-running dispute over pay, pension and job security. Meanwhile, the UK government says it's agreed to intensive talks on teacher pay and classroom sizes, with an estimated 200,000 teachers in England and Wales who hit picket lines this week for a 3-day strike action. Teachers were among tens of thousands of people who marched to the streets of London Wednesday.
I can't sit back and watch education decimated. It's not just about teacher pay, we're talking about funding for schools. Our children deserve so much better than this. They are our future.
In Greece, riot police deployed tear gas and sound grenades against protesters Thursday as workers held a general strike amidst ongoing anger over last month's rail disaster that killed 57 people. The strike grounded flights, halted public transport, kept ferries docked, canceled classes, and left public hospitals running with emergency staff. Rail workers say government neglect and privatization led to the decay of the train system. Back in the United States, in East Palestine, Ohio, newly released data shows soil around the site of February's Norfolk Southern train derailment contains levels of dioxin hundreds of times higher than what's considered safe. That's according to The Guardian, which had the data reviewed by former EPA officials and other chemical experts who said dioxins found in East Palestine were extremely concerning, even if they're below the federal cleanup threshold. The findings also contradicted assertions by the EPA, which told Congress last week dioxin levels were very low. In 2010, when the EPA found dioxin poses cancer risks, the agency tried to have those limits lowered, but the Obama administration kept the higher threshold in place. In related news, 2 trains operated by BNSF derailed in Arizona and Washington state Thursday. In Washington, cleanup teams were deployed after some 5,000 gallons of fuel leaked into the Snohomish Tribal Reservation. North Dakota's Supreme Court ruled Thursday the state's abortion ban should remain on hold while a lawsuit over its constitutionality is resolved. North Dakota's anti-abortion trigger law was supposed to take effect once Roe v. Wade was overturned, but a lower court temporarily blocked it last summer, arguing abortion rights are protected by the state constitution. The legislation makes it a felony to perform an abortion with limited exceptions in cases of rape, incest, or medical emergency. And the Los Angeles Times announced Thursday it will no longer use the word internment to describe the mass imprisonment of over 120,000 people of Japanese ancestry during World War II. It will instead use terms like incarceration, imprisonment, or detention. It's the latest step taken by the paper to rectify the harm it caused during the war when it called for the incarceration of Japanese and Japanese Americans. The LA Times issued a formal editorial apology 6 years ago. And those are some of the headlines. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman.